Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have something a little bit different, which is a presentation with Cameron Groome, CEO of Microbix. He's going to walk us through the story for anyone that's new to Microbix, or maybe some of our longer-term shareholders who would like to better understand some of the business lines and science behind what Microbix does. Cameron's been with the company almost 5 years, as has Adelaide Capital, joining shortly after Cameron. So we just thought it'd be a really good opportunity to kind of take a step back and explain the business in a more thorough way. As always, the presentation will contain forward-looking statements. If you'd like to find out more about those, you can find them on the company's presentation on the website. And there will be a Q&A period at the end. I would ask that everyone keeps the Q&A to what we're dealing with specifically in this webinar. If you have questions about the recent financials, a lot of those were dealt with in the webinar we did 2 weeks ago, which you can find on the Adelaide Capital YouTube channel. Or you can email me and I'll get those questions answered for you independently. With that long intro out of the way, I'd like to introduce Cameron Groome, CEO of Microbix. Hi, Cameron.
Hey, Deborah. Thank you very much for suggesting this webinar today. It's great to have the opportunity to present the company more broadly and give investors who haven't perhaps been following us closely for a long time a better overview. And I think this will be a very nice reference to post on the AdCap YouTube channel as well. I'm going to speak to a slide presentation the basis of which is our corporate deck that we have had up on the website, but is also supplemented with a little bit further information that will give a historical context to how Microbix came about, how the company is built, and a bit of where we're going as well. So let me pull that up now. So just in terms of a little bit of where we're going, of course, as you mentioned, Deborah, this presentation does contain forward-looking statements, and we rely on the safe harbor provisions laws in Canada and internationally for that, and we'll dwell on it. A little bit of the history of the company goes back many years, and that history's led us to have a great deal of expertise. Is probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Canadian life sciences companies listed on Toronto that's still independently operated. And I knew, even to the point where I knew the company back when I was an analyst in the early and mid 1990s through to about 2000. As I ultimately got involved with the company, it was really about changing surviving to prospering. Microbix's expertise didn't start overnight. The company was originally stemmed, I think, from the interest of Bill Gassel, our founder, that he derived in infectious diseases from his father, Hugh Gassel, who practiced for many years in Lakefield, Ontario, around Lakefield College School. And then that led Bill to graduate with an MSc from University of Toronto and begin making actually culture media for some of the Ontario public health labs that his father had worked with years before. And Bill soon being asked to go from making the culture medium for those labs to actually start culturing the organisms. Back in 1990, Microbix went public on the TSX via a reverse takeover transaction. And as often happens, that was probably too early and probably for some of the wrong reasons, but gives the company a long history having been listed on a public exchange. And the company continued to build from there, from having sales of about $500,000 a year at the time of its listing to becoming, by the mid-90s, a industrial scale and a very important supplier of test ingredients. And these are the antigen products that we'll talk about later to the diagnostics industry, and began pursuing some other long ball business opportunities. At the same time, the company by 2008 had actually moved into the current 265 watt line facility that's owned by the company, and is one now of our three adjacent sites in Mississauga, so been situated there for a good long while, and continued to pursue other lines of business. And these were things like technologies to optimize the yields from flu vaccine manufacturing, novel cytometry-based cell selection technologies, and one partnering asset that we still are looking at deriving value from, the biological Kinlytic urokinase, which is a low molecular weight urokinase those businesses had a couple things in common. One, in that they were all requiring somewhat different customer relationships than Microbix had been building in the diagnostics industry. And secondly, they required large amounts of investment, each one many tens of millions of investment required. And it ultimately transpired that Microbix just did not have the capital markets critical mass to be able to successfully bring those opportunities over the line. So this was something that started to be re-examined, scrutinized more carefully as I came on the board in 2012, as Bill Gassel stepped away from the CEO role, and my predecessor, Von Pantaloni, became CEO. So over the next few years, we really began to re-examine what the company should do and where it might grow most reliably and create value for shareholders. And some of those discussions were reaching their culmination as I was appointed the CEO in 2017 and set the goals of refocusing Microbix very much on our revenue generating businesses, and we'll talk about what those are, and achieving profitable growth, consistent profits, and growing revenues and earnings. And some of those actions began to bear fruit. We started to see that in 2018 as we moved to upgrade manufacturing of our key viral antigens using new technology. As we began to expand the portfolio of our quality assessment products, shorthanded CAPS, QAPS, moved to, very importantly, obtain our medical devices manufacturing accreditation. This is the ISO 13485 accreditation. And in 2018, received an innovation award from the Mississauga Board of Trade, recognizing some of the work we've done on those levels. In turn, in 2019, we saw growing opportunities for our CAPS products, and thereby, as a result, we moved to secure a second adjacent manufacturing site, a 235 watt line that we've since completed the renovations to that facility, started sales of fully regulated medical devices under the auspices of our CAPS line. We actually won an Ontario Chamber of Commerce award for exports. That's the Ontario Business Achievement Awards for our export work. And we secured loan funding from the FedDev Ontario federal government program for fostering innovation in industry. And that, of course, was setting us up. We had a good year in 2019. We're set up for working in different areas related to diagnostics when in early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. And we very quickly moved to create leading edge products for COVID faster than governments in many instances and faster than large competitors to build better products more quickly. And that's enabled us to really elevate our reputation, our awareness. We've worked through the pandemic in signing 9 international distributors for our CAPS. And we created the whole new product line of our DxTM brand viral transport medium with receipt of a grant from the Ontario Together Fund from the province of Ontario to accelerate the production of this critical product. So with those moves, 2021 was, again, a very pivotal breakout year for us, where we completed a bought deal public offering with IA Private Wealth and Bloom Burton for further expansion capital. We secured, in fact, our third manufacturing site on Watline Avenue in Mississauga, and we achieved record year-over-year sales growth in each quarter, totaling 77% increase in our year-over-year sales for 2021. And we achieved material and sustained profitability, as we'll talk about a little later. So for 2022, and where we'll touch on in this presentation, we've been gearing to support a much larger level of sales. Our current run rate, 12 months trailing, is about 20 million Canadian dollars in sales. And we're taking the steps with automation, new production spaces, and all the support infrastructure to be able to support sales of at least fivefold that level over the next few years to target 100 million in top line. And with that, we see continuation of expanding our gross margins, our EBITDA, and our net margins associated with that business. So again, this is a strong business getting stronger now. So today, where we are is we're selling around the world in different areas. We have built up our sales in Canada quite considerably over the last 18 months. We continue to be very strong in North America and in Western Europe, and we're building sales into other areas such as Africa, Asia, Australia, Scandinavia, and other material markets for our products. And the three areas that we'll delve into in a little bit more detail are quality assessment products that I've mentioned previously, that is going to be likely the biggest growth area for us in terms of the magnitude of the opportunities, followed by our viral transport medium to support molecular diagnostic testing, and with Ontario currently being our largest client, moving to build that more broadly. And then, of course, our antigens or ingredients business for the manufacture of certain kinds of medical diagnostic tests that had been doing $1 million a month pre-COVID has certainly been hit as a result of patients not wanting to see doctors and doctors not wanting to see patients. But all the while, we've been improving our production methodologies to increase our margins. So as that demand comes back, that business will be more profitable than it ever was historically. So this is where we've primed our business for continuing sales growth. We're increasing the pace of product development all the time and working to expand margins, earnings, and over time, share price appreciation as well. And in doing that, I'm very blessed to be working with just a great bunch of people. We've got tremendous bench strength in management. This touches on our top 5, but we have a total of 12 executives who comprise our senior management team and are really leading and enabling everyone in our organization to do their best work and drive value creation for shareholders. So we're very well equipped to be a business that's growing very strongly on an ongoing basis. We also have a great board of directors. It is, of course, independent. I'm the only management director on the board. Our chairman, Martin Marino, very experienced, independent, very experienced, with expertise with Merck Generics Groups and Apotex. Our chair of our Human Resources Governance Compensation Committee, Dr. Mark Cochran, who has recently retired as an executive director of Johns Hopkins Medicine, certainly not a lightweight organization with tremendous and broad expertise there. And Von Embro Pantaloni, who is our independent audit committee chair and my predecessor, with strong executive and management roles in the life science industry and current ongoing involvement. You may have also seen that we will be likely appointing a new director at our upcoming annual general meeting. We're pleased that Miss Jennifer Stewart has agreed to serve on the board of directors for the term going forward, as Mr. Anthony Giovinazzo has elected to not stand for 2023, for 2022-23 for personal reasons. And Joe Renner, Peter Bletcher, also very talented executives in their own right, and great to have such broad support from our board. In terms of our capital structure, we are a smaller capitalization company. We have a market capitalization of under 100 million. We have touched over that mark on a basic and fully diluted basis, of course, but we're seeing a very good appreciation of what we're doing in the fundamental value, but I think the market generally has been under pressure of late. We've been no exception. So our share price has declined from a high of 87 cents as we were disclosing our Q4 results for the fiscal year ended September 30, 2021 in late December, and some further customer orders and product development. But we see certainly great opportunities for shareholders in owning Microbix shares over good time horizons, and certainly you will see a very strong management participation in ownership of the company, with the management directors and founders holding on the order of 20% of the ownership of the company. So we're very much committed, and we have capital at risk in the company alongside shareholders, and are doing our damnedest to make sure that we're building very real value. I'll talk a little bit about the three sales-driven divisions of the company's business. Those being our quality assessment products that are sold to diagnostic test makers, clinical laboratories, and the agencies that actually establish the proficiency of clinical labs and accredit them for reimbursement and testing. And all three of these divisions produce very good margins, whether it's our quality assessment products, our diagnostic viral transport medium for specimen collection, or our ingredients business, all show really good margins. But it's very much the branded products, categories 1 and 2, that will drive the greatest growth for the companies. And these all stem from a common expertise that's been built off of that 30 plus years working with pathogens, working with viral and bacterial organisms, and knowing the dynamics of how to grow, purify, and inactivate, handle those organisms, and the long relationships that we've built with different companies in this field. And this next slide is really a bit of a visual, but I think it gives you an idea of just how much we're leveraging the common expertise that we have across these three areas. Aspects of how we make products, whether it's antigens, DxTM, or caps, are very common. And then it's just as important that all these relationships that we built over the years are to whom we're talking to sell these products. And these are people that we're not just knocking on a door for the first time. In many cases, these are relationships that go back a very long time as either customers of Microbix or collaborators with Microbix. And as it was suggested to me, I put this slide together. It's worth mentioning these are the relationships that I was able to sit down and recall over a coffee with a pad of paper and a pencil, rather than going through our customer relationship management software and doing a deep data mine. So you can get an idea that Microbix really is in the heart of this industry and has all the potential to build its relationships, broaden its relationships, deepen its relationships, and increase its revenues from all sorts of customers. And makes us very different from a company that's just wanting to be the 100th company putting a new test onto the market. We're collaborating with the people that are properly capitalized and are already franchise players through the global industry to build our sales. And it puts us in a very unique position. So what, in fact, are quality assessment products? The CAP shorthand is great for us because it's a regulatory catch-all. It expresses different levels of regulation for these products without ever putting us offside with regulatory bodies. But it's a little more opaque for investors to understand. What is a CAPS product? Well, what it is a near perfect mimic of a positive or negative patient sample for a different disease. So what a lab would see from a patient sample, and that could be a patient sample testing for COVID, could be a patient sample testing for chlamydia, it could be a patient sample testing for a childhood disease. These are all these sorts of things that we are able to create. And the reason we do that is so that a lab can periodically and regularly test itself to make sure that it isn't making systemic errors, that it isn't having false negative test results where you're telling a patient who is infected that they don't have a disease, and you don't have false positive results when you're telling a healthy patient that they do have a disease. And as we've seen, certainly with COVID, there are tremendously devastating consequences if you tell people they're not sick when they are, or that they are sick when they aren't. Each one of these can have devastating outcomes for individuals and communities. And it's important that this doesn't happen. And Microbix is bringing all this expertise to bear. We know how to grow the bugs. We know how to inactivate them. We can augment samples where we need to with leading edge biology. We know how to format samples, stabilize them, and we have the quality systems to validate their performance and make them at scale as fully regulated medical devices. And our caps have a number of advantages in this respect. Their performance is geared to be as much whole process and as close to the native organism as possible. Their formats are geared to be extremely convenient, having vials or swabs that support both liquid-driven testing modalities and those that are more point-of-care oriented, that you need something that is going to be stable at room temperature for a long time and really look exactly like a patient sample. So it can support any kind of workflow for a wide variety of tests. We've demonstrated long-term stability of these samples of our caps. And of course, this is something that makes it far superior to trying to keep an infected sample from a patient around that will not be stable, that is infectious, and that has no sort of manufacturing control associated with it. We're also able to produce and have demonstrated our ability to produce products that are multiplexed. So in other words, as tests, we'll see more and more of this in the coming year or so, as tests move from looking for a single pathogen in a sample to looking for multiple pathogens. So for example, we already have controls for tests that look simultaneously for COVID, influenza A, influenza B, and another common respiratory virus called RSV. More and more of the testing is going to look at a syndrome. If you have respiratory distress, well, we don't just want to know whether or not it's COVID. We want to know what it is. So let's test for a broader spectrum of pathogens to diagnose precisely and be able to treat. And this applies equally to respiratory, gastrointestinal organisms, sexually transmitted organisms, hospital-acquired organisms. This transformation is happening in the industry, and we're all over it. Also looking at both variants of concern. For example, for COVID, we have the original Wuhan strain and every variant of concern right up through Omicron we've made available for our customers. And we also have the capabilities to look at bacterial organisms, not just to identify what the bug causing an infection is, but to look within the bug's genome and to be able to establish whether it has resistance to certain antibiotics or not, and that knowledge used to drive immediately to prescribe the most effective therapeutic regimen to cure an infection. So very important. And then we have intellectual property, last of all, on all these products, where our innovations are defended by issued or pending patents that we both created on our own through Microbix and licensed through partners such as Copan Italia, our strategic partner who makes the best swabs in the world and permits us very graciously to co-brand with them on flock swab-based test controls. So very strong competitive advantages for Microbix in all of what we're doing. The categories for caps and understanding a little bit of, to whom do we sell these products and why is very important. And there are three broad categories. One is to the organizations that test the proficiency of clinical labs and provide them their accreditation to test patient samples and thereby be reimbursed by insurance companies or governments. And Microbix, through its expertise in its ingredients antigen business, began selling to these organizations years ago, about around 2008. but had a very limited product offering, as the company really wasn't focused on growing this business at that time. And it's with the increasing of our breadth of product line and the quality of our offerings and sophistication of our offerings that we've recently doubled that business, more than doubled that business over its historical rate. And at the same time, we're moving into some much larger customer areas where it really leverages the very broad relationships, or the very many relationships we have within the diagnostics industry. And the first of those is providing test controls to be bundled with the consumables of different diagnostics companies. So if a diagnostic company, for example, wants to provide a portable PCR instrument that's going to be used in a doctor's office or a pharmacy setting, for example, those test consumables have to have a compatible test control, such that, for example, every 25th to 50th test cartridges is sacrificed using a known positive control, so that it can be made more certain that the test instrument is continuing to work, that the technician operating it isn't making errors, and there aren't any issues with the reagents or other materials that need to be used the right way in the right sequence with that test. So that's an area that is taking off for us as well, with some very strong discussions ongoing. And I'm very confident and optimistic that certain relationships will come together that really drive some very big increases in our volume of sales of these products. And the third category, selling to the clinical labs themselves, so that a lab, for example, that is doing respiratory tests all day will start the day in their clinical lab with a known positive sample and a known negative sample, verify that everything is working properly, then continue to do the hundreds or thousands of tests they might run through the day, and end the shift or the day with another known positive and known negative, to again ensure that nothing has gone wrong. And then it's only then that there can be greater confidence that all the tests in the middle are valid and accurate. And these are the three categories into which we're selling. The proficiency testing category, or what we shorthand as PT, is the longest area of relationships with us. And then we're building in parallel the OEM relationships and the clinical lab relationships, both directly and through distributors. This is very much where we're building our business. And we've now, in 2021, we have came over 4.5 million of sales in that category, so approaching 5 million per year versus 1 million historically for this business. And we really see this as very much the beginning for our controls business. We have been moving to scale this business quite dramatically through automation and systems, and going from making thousands of units per week to about 5,000 a week capacity currently of units of swab-based controls, to upwards of 50,000 per week minimum single shift capacity is what we're gearing for now out of our second production site. And with these products selling, as you might have noticed on the preceding slide, at anywhere from $10 to over $30 US a unit, we're literally in many cases taking a Copan flock swab that's worth tens of cents and turning it into a test control that sells for tens of dollars. So this is really tremendously increasing the value embedded in these products and deriving a very profitable franchise for our company. So what you can look for here is increasing sales to the OEMs, increasing sales to the clinical labs, and a move to millions of dollars per month of revenues from this category, from roughly a little over $1 million a quarter. So that's the scale of what we're working to execute now. Talk a little bit. That rounds out the caps side of our business, Deborah. Maybe I can pause for a moment and just ask whether there's anything that you feel that I've not addressed with regards to our caps test controls.
No, I think you covered all the bases. I don't see any questions from the audience. If I do see any pop up, maybe it makes sense to just stop at each section and address those.
Sure. Well, that's what I've hoped to do. And I think we're tracking our time, allotted time fairly nicely, if not ahead of schedule. So it'll give us a good amount of time at the end for questions and hopefully get everyone out, under the hour mark, unless people want to stay longer for the presentation. So I'll jump over a little bit, Deborah and others, to talk about the viral transport medium. What is viral transport medium, and why on earth did we start to make it? Well, if you're taking a sample using a flock swab, for example, and wanting to test that, well, there are certainly viruses in your respiratory tract that swabbed sample will take up. But there are also enzymes and compounds within your nasal or throat or other bodily secretions that start to break down that virus, as well as just the heat and molecular motion and a number of items. So as hours go by, or possibly even days, the amount of virus in that sample may have little relation to what was in there when it was first collected from the patient. So what we therefore do is we collect that sample and we look to put it in a solution called viral transport medium that stabilizes the sample and fixes the amount of virus that's going to be present and detectable in that virus by the time it gets to the clinical lab. So very critical for any kind of molecular, or what we often call PCR-based testing. And Microbix looked at this as we were entering fully into the pandemic, and we said, well, we make tens of thousands, literally, of liters of very complex media every year, and we identified that Ontario would have supply chain issues with sourcing viral transport medium, because to our knowledge, no one in Ontario and no one in Canada was actually making this product under a medical devices quality system. So we volunteered to Ontario and approached authorities in the province and said, we think we can make strategic quantities of this for you. Would you like us to do so? Would you like to undertake us to scale production of this product? And we didn't historically make a lot of product in the little vials that were required. We make media by the barrel. So we had to come up with a production system to be producing vials of VTM such that it met Ontario's requirements. And they said, yes, please do that. And we ultimately concluded an agreement in the fall of 2020, whereby Ontario provided us with grant funding to accelerate our moving to produce this product commercially and make it available in strategic quantities. And that, as you can see from this slide, moved forward very well. And we began producing in the spring of 2021, actually in the winter of 2021 and delivering in the spring of 2021, producing viral transport medium at the rate of about 50,000 vials per week. And we received a first order from Ontario that spring for $4.25 million worth. We received a second order for $4.7 million worth in late December of 2021. And we're a bit blessed and cursed in this regard, in that the better part of what we've made has been snapped up by Ontario. So then we're criticized about dependence on one client. So we're now in the process of moving to scale that manufacturing within our third production site, which will be fitted out with the primary objective of producing VTM, but of course, flexibly able to make other Microbix products in that space, such as caps as well. And that will be initially with double shifting of our viral transport medium under the semi-automated production methods we have now. And then as we move to full automation, we'll have much greater capacity and ability to provide for much better for other commercial customers and other provincial or federal buyers as well. and be fully globally competitive on price. So very good innovation for us, and we continue to look to broaden out the number of product offerings in this sample collection device area for us and generate growth and profitability as we have already, but to a greater scale in this business line also.
I didn't have any questions for VTM, but I did have one that came in for CAPS, if you don't mind stepping back another chapter. What are the alternative options for both diagnostic test OEMs and labs if they don't use Microbix CAPS?
There are always options for different groups. Some labs, there's a good case in point would be a lab in the United Kingdom near Birmingham that wasn't using controls properly. And they belatedly discovered after some months that they were missing probably 80% of the positive COVID patients that they were receiving samples from. They were calling negative as opposed to actually being infected. And they led somewhere between 40 and 50,000 patients who were actually positive for COVID to go back to their jobs at the hospital or the nursing home or go visit their grandparents, being falsely told that they didn't have COVID. So that's the kind of catastrophic outcome that can happen if labs aren't using controls properly. Sometimes labs will try to use a homemade control that is not manufactured with the same level of quality system that Microbix will provide, and is a bit of a half measure, if I can use that term, and perhaps meets the letter of the requirement, but not the objective of the regulation. There are other companies that make controls in the world, but there are limited to perhaps a half a dozen companies that make them with the alacrity that we do, whereas there are hundreds of companies making or attempting to make diagnostic tests. So this is a business of skill, trust, and relationships as well, and that's something that we move forward on.
Okay, and then talking about BTM, we had a question: when will full automation be in production?
It should be at the very latest by the start of our fourth quarter, so by July 1, 2022. That may come in a little bit ahead of that, perhaps in June or in May. But I'm always guarded as to when we have to receive the machinery, have it qualified by the vendor, and we have to do our internal qualifications as well before we can put it into production. So quality is the very, very first thing that we have to ensure. And therefore, I'd rather be a little bit more conservative about when that comes online. But that timing actually isn't bad, because people will be then looking to their supplies for the 2022-2023 season, where in the Northern Hemisphere, we always have a greater propensity towards respiratory viruses, whether it's flu, COVID, or something completely different, through the fall season when there's colder temperatures, less UV, and more people crowded indoors. So viral transmission goes up. Makes sense.
And are those full automation expansion guidelines for both VTM and CAPS?
Yes, for both of those. For VTM, we would be looking to go from 50,000 vials a week, single shift, to more on the order of 50,000 vials per day, single shift capacity. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to sell out that capacity on day one, but you certainly can't sell capacity you don't have. And so that's the number on a per day basis for VTM capacity. And for CAPS, it's similar, 5 to 10x scaling, 5x single shift, 10x double shift is what we're targeting to be able to keep up. So, if there's a diagnostic OEM that's making millions of cartridges that they're shipping per month for certain tests, then divide by 25 or divide by 50 if they're working with us in terms of the number of controls that we'd be providing. But each one of those controls, depending on its sophistication, can sell for anywhere from as little as $10 for the most basic to $30 or $40 per unit for the more sophisticated multiplex controls.
Okay. And just to clarify, full automation for both by September 30th?
Full automation for VTM. For CAPS, we're looking at automating some of the most critical steps. It's much more custom engineering for the front to back automation of CAPS. So for the moment, we're automating the bottlenecks in our production areas first, and then working our way through to ensure the robustness of the front to back production. But we'll be able to move to the numbers I've cited based on the steps that are now in process.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions if you want to move on to antigens.
Sure. Thank you, Deborah. And thank you, everybody, for the questions. In terms of the antigen side of our business, this is really where we jumped from with the original work that Bill and the team started doing, Bill Gassel and the team started doing, starting with creating growth medium for the public health labs, and then gaining experience in growing, purifying, and inactivating different pathogens. And that's what we refer to as antigens, are those purified and inactivated pathogens. And you need those antigens to drive tests whereby you're looking for antibodies in a patient's blood. So in other words, that Y-shaped antibody really coming in and attaching to the antigen and driving a test reaction, which could be the color change in a test strip, like the COVID, similar to a COVID test, not quite the same as a COVID antigen test. But these are tests where you can be looking for, example, has a patient been exposed to the Epstein-Barr virus that causes infectious mononucleosis and is now being implicated as a probable cause of multiple sclerosis. Whether you're checking a pregnant mother to assess whether she has adequate immunity to a virus like rubella, German measles, that will harm the developing baby if she gets that without sufficient protection while she's pregnant. So it's all these kind of tests that drive the demand for antigens. And we're producing for the top quality conscious test makers that want a native organism, that want the best possible sensitivity and specificity for their tests. And we grow at industrial scale, grow, safely handle, safely purify, and safely inactivate 30 different viruses that are BSL-2 or BSL-1, and provide those to well north of 100 leading international diagnostics companies that manufacture tests for those organisms. And we've seen that business change for us. It used to be about 90% of our overall revenues, with just a smidgen from CAPS sold to the proficiency testing and accreditation providers. Now the antigens business has dropped below 50% of our overall sales because of the growth of CAPS and DxTM as medical devices and faster growing sales areas. But it's not in any way to say that the antigen business isn't profitable or the antigen business is going away. And in fact, it gives a nice bit of counter-cyclicality to COVID, because we actually saw our sales of antigens decline as a result of the pandemic because of the very breadth of the portfolio, that people weren't going to the doctor to check on a urinary tract irritation. They weren't going to the doctor for a prenatal workup. So a lot of our customers found their test sales going down, and consequently our antigen sales have dropped off by about a third. So we look for that to start to snap back as things normalize. And we'll see that snap back at better margins due to some of the technological upgrades we'd undertaken and have concluded even amid COVID. So very good for us, having this breadth of business and multiple revenue streams. And you see that in some of our numbers for fiscal 2021. And you're looking into our bioreactor lab currently on this slide. But we generated sales of 18.6 million Canadian for our fiscal 2021, with our cap sales going up by 208% year over year, and our VTM sales having gone from 0 to 4.5 million in fiscal 2021. So you really see how we're building our business quite considerably from a top line point of view, but of equal importance, what we've done with the gross margins and the bottom line. The gross margins improving by 15% year over year, in a 15% gross margin improvement in a single year. Now, that's the result of work that's been ongoing, but it's also the result of moving into fully branded products like the red controls box you see for our caps there from the more anonymous maker of ingredients. So opening up new opportunities for us at higher margins and ability to grow sales. And you start to really see this in our numbers. You can see the steady revenue growth that we were starting to drive, and in fact would have seen results pretty close to 2021's numbers in 2020, but for the disruptive effect of the pandemic on our operations. But now, as we furthered and expanded our profile and reputation and launched innovative new products, we've made that back in 2021 with record top line sales. We've improved the dollars of gross margin considerably in 2021 and moving into 2022, as well as the percentage gross margin that I mentioned earlier, going from shy of 5 million gross margin dollars to 11 million gross margin dollars, and thereby achieved a very positive EBITDA, even as we're investing in the growth of the business, with EBITDA moving from under $1 million to over $6 million in our fiscal 2021. And by extension, seeing our debt to equity, our debt load coming down in relative and real terms, and as well our liquidity, our current ratio, increasing quite considerably as we drive the success of the business. So what you have now with Microbix after all this history is a strong business getting stronger. And, part of what we see as well, it takes a little while for this to sink in. We have equity research coverage. I'm shifting from business fundamentals to a little bit of stock market commentary here. But we are starting to see appreciation of our share price. But of course, we're whipsawed by markets as well. We've seen, whether it's the events that took place in Ottawa with protests and pretty heavy police response to those protests, whether it's concerns about interest rate hikes or concerns about war between Russia and Ukraine, those have an impact on our numbers. But regardless, we're trading at a fraction of comparable pricing these days in terms of what we see happening. So there is room for market appreciation in our shares as we just continue to deliver strong quarter after strong quarter and execute on the growth and scaling of our business. So what I'd tend to leave everybody with would be, what we're looking at is a company that's got very strong annual sales growth. I mentioned growth of close to 80% year over year for 2021 over 2020, and we're on track for some very strong fiscal 2022 results as well. We're working to improve gross margins across all three of our operating businesses and demonstrated our ability to do so. We're already generating strong positive cash flow from operations. We had a record fiscal 2021. We're on track for a record fiscal 2022. We're very well capitalized. We have over 12 million in the bank presently and are well provisioned to do the automation steps and production expansion. And that's, not just machines for packaging and filling and labeling and so forth. That's also all of the systems that support that, whether that's digitizing our quality management systems and our batch production records, ERP for enterprise resource planning upgrades, laboratory information management systems to accelerate further the rate of product introduction. All this is going on. We have a very broad product offering, and I think we are not in any way to be confused with a quote-unquote COVID play. Our business is so much broader than that, and our involvement in infectious diseases goes back, as I mentioned, over 30 years. We're the last thing from a one-dimensional Johnny-come-lately. We're, in fact, extremely well positioned for the redeployment of all the diagnostics capacity that's been built because of COVID. And we'll see benefits to that, our very broad product offerings. And I encourage everyone to visit our new website and just look through the many products that we have available to industry, and how we're getting the word out more broadly about Microbix and getting new customers every day. We have large opportunities in caps, VTM, and antigens. These are the things that are really drive the growth and value creation within our business. So with that, I'll stop sharing screen and offer a little more time for questions.
Sure, Cameron. I know you just touched on this, but I have two questions about COVID. So maybe you can go a little bit more in detail. So one of the questions is asking about testing falling off, and how do you think you could still grow your caps and VTM businesses? So maybe you could talk about some of that testing redeployment. And then the other question is how much of your business is currently related to COVID? And then again, they're asking, will business continue to be strong and growing after COVID?
With respect to our involvement with COVID, we have created test controls for all elements of COVID because we can, and it was the right thing to do. So we're generating on the order of 25% of our sales for caps are in relation to COVID directly or indirectly. And we have controls for the Wuhan strain, for the UK strain, Brazilian strain, South African strain. We've even created in precisely 8 weeks from authorizing work on an Omicron control, we released a fully FDA, Health Canada, EU, and TGA Australia compliant COVID control. So that's the speed at which we can work. What we're already working with multiple alliance partners on is their multiplex tests. So I'll be surprised if most of us get a test next year and it is limited just to COVID. It will be at a minimum, I expect, testing simultaneously for 4 viruses: COVID, influenza A, influenza B, and RSV. And there are companies developing tests where they look for more than 10 respiratory viruses with whom we're working to create controls so they can check the instrument, see if all those tests are working with a single control on a Copan flock swab. Similarly, in other categories of infectious disease, we're seeing a big move to multiplex testing as well, and also to establish which antibiotic therapy will be optimal. So, you want to know, for example, if somebody's going to the doctor with a urinary tract infection, well, the first thing is, what bug is it? Thank you very much. And the second is, what antibiotic is going to be effective? And multiplex testing and antimicrobial resistance testing are exactly the technologies using the sophisticated PCR capacity that are planned and getting rolled out now. And we'll see those by next fall. So you start counting back and saying, when do companies need controls for those? If they're launching new tests in the fall, they need our products at least a quarter in advance. So that's why we're looking for some good strength in the back half of this year, that it then will be a launching pad into even stronger 2023 numbers.
Okay, I think that thoroughly explains the questions or answers the questions. One thing that I was hoping you could talk about a little bit is Microbix's core competencies. I mean, you always talk about when you add product lines that they have to fall within this core competency suite. And we've seen the company divest or write down assets that didn't fit that core competency. Can you go a little bit more into detail in terms of when you're developing products or potentially looking at acquisitions, what do you consider Microbix's core niche?
Well, very much we have capability in infectious diseases, diagnostics, and manufacturing and quality systems. So these are the the areas we have very strong expertise in. We have as well tremendous expertise in different aspects of cell culturing. So any product that involves mammalian cell culture manufacture, that involves downstream purification technologies, that results in regulated medical device products, we have expertise, we have customer relationships, and we can produce products in those areas. Some of the instrumentation areas that the company had looked into and pursued in the past via some of the work that the company was doing in semen sexing technology in the past was not an area the company had client relationships in particularly, nor did it have a good view of the freedom to operate of that landscape. And the company had also got involved previously with therapeutics and vaccines, and that could have been pursued successfully on a partnering strategy, but the company had difficulty in securing the required partners, and there just wasn't the amount of capital available. When you're talking about a company with a sub 100 million market cap and you're pursuing multiple products, multiple projects that are going to need anywhere from 20 to 100 million each to bring together, it's, to me, not as pragmatic as it needed to be. And this focus on nearer term deliverables, things that we can undertake with a higher degree of certainty of success that we feel is a more prudent use of shareholder resources these days.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about competitive advantages?
Sure. I talked a little bit about that on one of the slides, and maybe I'll just pop that back up. For example, if we're looking at our CAPS product, where do we come in on these? Well, some of these we're looking at top performance criteria for the products, that their whole genome and whole workflow wherever possible. So they're controlling as much as possible of the test. And for example, if we support and release a product that's going to control for sexually transmitted infections, for example, we've tested some of our products on upwards of 50 different companies' instruments to ensure that they work extremely well, not just on one company's test, but on everybody's tests. So that performance element is very important. The formats, having the capability to produce products, whether they're in the liquid vial in the center pane or on a flocked swab, very important, so that it's very well suited no matter what the particular workflow of a test looks like. The stability I mentioned, if you trying to save a patient sample and you've got, something Bob coughed up that's been in the back of the fridge for a year, you don't know what that looks like as a lab. Whereas we have formal stability studies at different temperatures and instructions for use in our products. The multiplexing capability of controlling from multiple tests with a single liquid or swab-based sample, incredibly important, and variance and capability of assessing antibiotic resistance, very important. And we have intellectual property for controls on swabs that we've licensed. We also have intellectual property on how to safely and quickly manufacture different test controls using techniques that we've invented and pioneered the application of. So there's a lot of expertise in there, as well as, of course, having clear title to all of our cell lines, our viral seeds, and our bacterial strains. Just that library of organisms and the collection of techniques that we've mastered give us tremendous competitive advantages from supply chain. We control our own supply chain, which is a non-trivial thing these days, as well as know how to manipulate all these organisms safely and successfully. So a lot of things we do well, and it's up to us as management to be extracting a lot of value out of that on behalf of shareholders.
I think that's all I have for questions. We're a few minutes over the hour. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about today, Cameron?
I would just say that please do, for new shareholders, please do have a look at Microbix. We're very much a real business. We've cracked 100 employees here in Ontario. We've certainly have over 100 customers internationally. And we're continuing to build our business in a disciplined and responsible fashion. So I would represent an investable company. And please do consider us for your portfolio with a growth orientation. So with that, I thank everybody and really appreciate the time that folks have spent today. And for you, appreciate your setting this up, Deborah.
Yeah, no, thanks for walking us all through the story. I mean, most of us aren't microbiologists, so it's good to have at least a bit more of an in-depth understanding of what it is that Microbix actually does. Although the numbers now speak for themselves, I think it's important for people to understand what they're investing in. So appreciate you taking the time, Cameron. Thanks to everyone that participated. If you have any questions or you'd like to book a meeting or get more information, feel free to reach out. And yeah, I hope everyone has a nice afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, everyone.